All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Here we are at the All Star break in Major League Baseball, and this should be an interesting second half of the season on the American League side of the ledger. How many teams are going to be postseason bound from the AL East? That's a big question because currently all five teams within that division are sporting a winning record. And in each of the last three seasons, we've seen three teams make it from this division to the playoffs. Now, speaking of the American League East, will the Baltimore Orioles be able to overtake the Tampa Bay Rays for the top spot in that division? You look at the way things are going right now, the Orioles are just two games behind the Rays. The Rays have not been playing their best baseball as of late for a variety of reasons. You look at the competition that they've been playing. You see how the Philadelphia Phillies went into the Trop and handled them, and then they just lost that series to the Atlanta Braves. Albeit Tampa Bay did win today, but they are 3-7 over their last 10 contests. And the Baltimore Orioles, they enter the break winners of their last five. We saw them obliterate the Minnesota Twins this afternoon to finish the first half of the season with a record of 54-35. And I think this is going to be an interesting race as Tampa Bay definitely has to get healthy in their rotation. You look at the Boston Red Sox, and the Red Sox, to me, have been better than most of us expected. I did not expect the Red Sox to finish this year with a winning record, but you look at where the Sox are so far. Yes, they're in last place in this division. They're 48-43. They're 9 out, but they finished the first half of the season by winning their last five. And of course, they just swept the Oakland Athletics today. But Boston is only two games behind the Houston Astros for the last wild card spot in the American League. And, it's one of those where you came into the season, okay, why did Boston sign this guy? Why did Boston let this guy go? And so forth. And nonetheless, you look at how things have been, and the Red Sox have pieced this thing together. Alex Cora, to me, I don't think gets enough credit for being a very good big league manager. And this Boston team is believing. And I think in the second half of the season, the Red Sox going to be one of those teams. If you let them hang around, they could do some damage. And especially if they hang around, I think the fans at Fenway are definitely, going to rally behind this team. Will the offense get going for the New York Yankees? They've had a lot of woes. You think about it, they're in the bottom part of the American League for a lot of important categories, which includes runs, hits, as well as batting average. And of course, because of that, Dylan Lawson got fired today as the team's hitting coach. New York definitely needs to get Aaron Judge back, but then also guys got to step up and produce. And I think, it's one of those where we see the Yankees, they can hit home runs. And I think this is a microcosm of an issue at the MLB level right now, in my opinion, where you have too many guys who are simply swinging for the fences. And I think you see this with this Yankee team as it has really been feast or famine. And I think strategy wise, things need to change for the Yankees, but they also need to change for a lot of teams around baseball overall. And it starts from the minors, college, high school, you name it, as far as, we got to get out of, this mantra where, it's home run or bust, if you will. And I think that is something that is hindering the Yankees. The Yankees need to hit the contact. They need to be more efficient. And if they don't do that, they have the potential to win, to get to the postseason, but getting to the postseason and staying there and doing damage are two different things. So let's see how the Yankees can fix their lineup in the second half of the season. And speaking of New York, will Carlos Rodon be able to get into a rhythm to provide some depth in this Yankee rotation behind Garrett Cole? That's what Carlos Rodon was brought in during the offseason for. And of course, he's been injured for the bulk of this season, made his debut recently, went five in the third innings. But the Yankees are going to need Carlos Rodon to be the Carlos Rodon that they signed to that big contract. The Yankees still have, I'm going to say, much more than a puncher's chance to do something in the second half of the season. It's one of those where, you know, they're 49 and 42, which obviously has them in fourth place in the American League East. But you look at this division. I mean, if the Yankees obviously were in the Central, we're talking about a first place team right here by far. But nonetheless, they play in the toughest division in baseball. And even with that said, as much as, we're talking about the Yankees right now, as much as we, see people bash them, the Yankees are only one game behind the Houston Astros for the final wild card spot in the American League. So something can give, especially if this team gets Aaron Judge back and they get behind him. I don't expect Aaron Judge to be the Aaron Judge that we saw last year when he was on that historical tear. But nonetheless, if the Yankees can get Aaron Judge back at an MVP caliber level, this lineup should improve. At 50 and 41, the Toronto Blue Jays are definitely lurking. And it's one of those because a lot of people really haven't been talking about the Jays is due to the fact of you look at what Baltimore and Tampa Bay are doing in that division. But Toronto's 50 and 41. They're 7 games behind Tampa for first place in that division, but they are currently in possession of the second wild card spot in the American League as they're tied with Houston. You look at this team, Bo Bichette is having a solid, well, let me rephrase that, not a solid, a darn good season for Toronto. Vlad Jr. has been good, but can he pick it up in the second half of the season? And if Vlad Jr. Can get it going and take it up another notch with his play at the plate, then you know what? Toronto is definitely going to be in a good spot. You look at their pitching. Will it be able to hold up? Kevin Gausman's been solid. Chris Bassett, the free agent signee, has been solid for the Jays, as has Jose Berrios. But then now can they get Alek Manoah back on track? He was sent down to the minors to work on his stuff. He hasn't been good this year. Obviously, that's why he was sent to the minors. But hopefully that trip down to the minors can get Manoah to be back to being the guy that won 16 games last year for Toronto. You look at the American League Central, and will the Cleveland Guardians be able to take control? Because somebody's got to win this division by hook or by crook. This is only going to be a one bid division for the postseason, if you will, on the American League side. You look at it, the Guardians, they're 45 and 45, and they are in first place. The Minnesota Twins are just a half game behind Cleveland. You got the Tigers 5.5 back, the White Sox 8.5 back, and of course, Kansas City 19.5 back. I think at the end of the day, this is Cleveland's division to lose. And I said that coming into this season. Cleveland has too much talent, in my opinion, to be playing 500 baseball right now. And at some point, somebody's got to pick it up. Maybe it's a scenario like it was last season. We saw last year where Cleveland, Minnesota, and Chicago basically were jockeying back and forth until like the final couple of weeks of the season when Cleveland took over and they were able to win this division. The talent is there. You're not going to get a wild card out of this division. Minnesota, who is the second place team in the Central, they're currently 5 games behind the Astros for the final wild card spot. But then you look at the teams that they're going to have to leapfrog to try to get to the postseason. Again, Cleveland has the talent. Will they be able to seize the moment? We got to wait and see. And then you look at the West. Are the Texas Rangers going to be able to hold on? As this has been a phenomenal year one for Texas under new manager Bruce Bochy. The Rangers are 52 and 39. They're in first place in this division. And this is in spite of the fact that their big money guy over the offseason, Jacob DeGrom, is out for this season and a good chunk of next season as well. Nathan Eovaldi has been pitching out of this world. As I don't think anybody expected to see this from Nathan Eovaldi. He's a Cy Young candidate, and I think he's got a big payday coming around the corner. It's one of those where you look at the Houston Astros, obviously between departures in free agency as well as injuries, the Astros have taken a step back. But even with that said, Houston is only 2 games behind Texas for first place in this division. And then they're also tied with the Jays for a wild card spot in the American League. This is a veteran team that knows how to get it done. Also, you have a veteran manager in Dusty Baker, a future Hall of Famer, as well, calling the shots from the dugout for the Astros. They're going to get healthy at some point. And when the Astros do, I think they're going to be a very dangerous team in the second half of the season. You look at the Seattle Mariners, and again, this is another instance where there's a team that has too much talent and they need to pick up the pace. The Mariners broke through and made the postseason last year, and they were expected to build off of that. And Seattle simply has not. They've hovered around 500 for the bulk of the season. They're 45 and 44. They're 4 games behind Houston for the final wild card spot in the American League West, and they're in third place in the division, and they're also 6 games behind the Texas Rangers. Again, too much talent in this lineup on this team overall. The Mariners definitely got to get it going. You look at the Los Angeles Angels, and this team is fading fast. They had a slew of injuries just before the break. We saw the blister to Shohei Ohtani. He's still out there hitting, just not pitching right now. But nonetheless, both Anthony Rendon and Mike Trout, that hurts. The Angels finished the first half of the season by losing their last 5. They're 1-9 in their last 10 overall. And this could be a team where, depending on how quick they get Mike Trout back and or Anthony Rendon, and obviously Mike Trout, we're not going to see him for they're saying 4 to 8 weeks. I'd say maybe 6 or 7 weeks would be more realistic, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. But nonetheless, they are losing steam very fast. And with that said, for the Angels, is this going to be Shohei's swan song wearing a uniform for them? I think it is. I'm not ruling out that he remains in Southern California. Obviously, it would just be with the Dodgers, but it's one of those scenarios where I think it comes down to the Dodgers and Mets. I'm not saying that he's going to sign with either one of those teams, but I'll tell you like this: I don't think that anybody is going to offer Shohei more money than the Mets will. That doesn't mean he's going to go play there, and I think the Dodgers offer is going to be healthy as well. But nonetheless, I think the Angels are simply going to be outbid for his services unless he's very loyal to Artie Moreno. We got to wait and see. Will the Chicago White Sox be sellers? And you look at the Sox right now, they're 12 and a half out of it for the final wild card. They're 8 games out of the first place in the Central. They're 16 games under 500. I think it's only a matter of time before the White Sox become sellers. I look at 2 players on this team that will definitely gauge some interest: Yasmani Grandal, the veteran catcher, and of course Lucas Giolito, the starting pitcher. Both guys are free agents. I think there will be a market for Grandal at the trade deadline. I think there'll also be a market for him in the offseason and free agency, and definitely Giolito. Giolito is scheduled to become a free agent. I don't see the White Sox keeping him. So if you're Chicago, you definitely want to try to move him now and get some type of package with maybe a prospect or 2 back in your fold. Now, which teams from the American League are locks at this point to make the postseason? I'm going to say Baltimore, I'm going to say Tampa, and I'm going to say Texas, because I look at Tampa. They just got off to that hot start, and I think the ebbs and flows of the season obviously are going to be there. They have been there at the times for the Rays, but this is a very talented team. Of course, their strength is their pitching, so they got to get healthy. Baltimore, I think just like last season, Baltimore's playing with house money because nobody expected uh Baltimore to do what they did last season. And Baltimore was on the cusp of making the postseason. Just missed out. They ran out of gas coming down the stretch. But the Orioles have found a way to build off of that. And I'm optimistic about it. Maybe the Orioles are buyers at the trade deadline. We got to wait and see. But this team is playing some darn good baseball right now. And then I'm going to say Texas as well because, Texas has a slim lead right now over the Astros in the West. But you look at these Rangers and you look at Bruce Bochy. Bruce Bochy is a veteran manager that knows how to get it done. And we've seen it in recent years where some of these veteran guys come in and it's kind of the old school way meets the new school way, but they're still able to get their message across. We saw it with Buck Showalter last year, where he led the Mets to a 100-win season. Obviously, it didn't work out for them in the postseason. And you think about Dusty Baker, and of course, there were probably some people that snickered when Dusty Baker took over as the manager of the Astros. But I really think, and I said this then, and I'll say it now, I think that if there was ever a manager who was available at the time that was going to be able to right the ship for those Astros after that whole scandal, I think Dusty Baker was that guy. He's a player's manager, and every place he goes, he wins. He knows how to get the best out of his guys. Obviously, the only thing that was missing from his Hall of Fame resume was the World Series. He got it last year. And, nonetheless, with Bruce Bochy had success in San Diego with the Padres, of course, winning those three World Series championships over a 5-year span with the San Francisco Giants. And of course, there were plenty of people who thought that, Bochy was done with managing at the big league level. But at the end of the day, the Texas Rangers made him an offer that he could not refuse. And I think his old school vibe, because again, people forget Bochy was a solid catcher in his days, playing in the big leagues, most notably with the Padres. But nonetheless, he's out there getting this message across. The pitching has definitely improved for the Texas Rangers, and I think this team is going to be very formidable. But I think when it's all said and done, I think it's going to be a battle for those final two wild card spots in the AL side. CJ, what's going on? I'm going to touch with you in a couple of minutes as far as your questions there. I just want to say this part about the wild card. It's one of those where I think whoever finishes second in the East, whether it's Tampa, Baltimore, maybe Toronto makes a move, the Yankees, I don't know. I think that team is definitely a lock for the postseason. Obviously, the division winner is. I'm not going to say that Tampa is going to win this division, uh, but it's one of those, if you will, where I think it's going to be a battle. The Jays, the Yankees, and the Red Sox. And it's going to be interesting to see because obviously the trade deadline all around baseball has changed due to the fact that there's an additional wild card slot. More teams are real or optimistic, if you will, as far as making the playoffs. And then you also have the scenario, of course, where less teams are likely to be sellers. And then, of course, there's not that additional waiver wire trade deadline, if you will. So things are more compact now. So it's going to be interesting to see who's going to throw that white flag. Obviously, on the American League side, Kansas City and Oakland are clearly out of it, but do they really have anything that anybody would want at the trade deadline? We've seen Aroldis Chapman get traded to Texas. That was probably like the only trade chip that Kansas City had to deal with, and they parted with it. I do expect the White Sox to definitely be sellers. I know there are people out there in mainstream media who are throwing it out there. Should the Angels, be sellers, and should they go out there and trade Shohei Otani? That ain't happening. Artie Moreno, he did that 180 as far as deciding not to sell this team. Do you think he's really decided not to sell this team just to sit up there and say we're going to trade Shohei? It's one of those where the Angels are going to make a legit bid to keep him. I do believe that. But I just think there's going to be more money on the table for both the Dodgers and Mets. I'm not saying that either one of those teams are going to be able to sign him, but I'm just saying that they're going to be there. These are two teams, in my opinion, that are going to offer him more money than the Angels will. It just has to be. We just got to wait and see how it unfolds for him rather in the off season. But I still think it's going to be a battle for those two final wild card spots in the American League. Toronto's in that mix. Houston and Texas, I think, are going to be in that mix because I think the Astros are going to make a real push to try to catch the Rangers in the second half. They're only 2 games behind them right now, anyway. But nonetheless, the Yankees, they're going to be in that mix. I think the Yankees, is always, they're going to be buyers. The Red Sox, is one of those where I think the Red Sox are playing with house money right now, and I think they're going to try to make a postseason push. Seattle, can they pick up their play? I think all of these are the legit teams that have a chance. I talked about the Angels. They're fading fast. Shohei can't do it by himself, and they need a healthy Anthony Rendon and Mike Trout, and that's going to be a tall task at this point. But CJ, I'm definitely going to be doing a video on the NL. If it's not tomorrow, it's going to be Wednesday night. I'm not going to do it Tuesday night, obviously, for the Midsummer Classic, even though my personal opinion, and I'm putting this out there, I'm not as big a fan of the All-Star game as I once was. My personal opinion, I wish the teams would go back to wearing their own individual uniforms. It's tradition. I was born and raised on it. Call me an old school guy, but nonetheless, I think it's still going to be a good game, but nonetheless, I'm just not as big of a fan as I once was. So definitely either tomorrow night, if not Wednesday. You're saying that you could not believe that the Giants let Bochy go for, that idiot Gabe Kapler. I'll say this. I think Bochy's time to me had run its course in San Francisco. And I'm not saying that he was a bad manager. I'm just saying that that team got old and they just needed a new voice. And honestly, I really did believe that when Bochy, was done in San Francisco, that he was done. I was really shocked to see him come back to managing. But again, like I said, Texas just gave him an offer that he couldn't refuse. Gabe Kapler is a guy that relies heavily on analytics, and of course, the analytics you know, to me, have like it's analysis paralysis. It's taking thinking out of it, and it's also rubbed some of the veteran players the wrong way. You think back to when Gabe Kapler was managing with the Phillies, and of course the run-in with guys like Jake Arrieta and so many others. It worked like a charm. His first year in San Francisco when the Giants, I think they won 107 games that year, won the division, had that historic battle with the Dodgers and the LDS. But it was a scenario. Obviously, things came together that year for San Francisco. A lot of guys were on free agency deals, and they wanted to strike it big. And I think their play on the field, proved that. Gabe Kapler to me has been an up and down manager throughout his career, but here in San Francisco, I think the biggest thing that has hurt the Giants recently has been their inability to get that big name free agent guy. We saw them strike out twice this past offseason. The Giants offered Aaron Judge more money than the Yankees did. And honestly, Aaron Judge should thank the Giants because that sweetened the pot for him because the Giants were dead serious about getting him and making him their quote unquote next Barry Bonds, if you will. They struck out there. They struck out on Carlos Correa, and let me rephrase that. They really didn't strike out. It's something that their medical staff picked up on. And if you followed Carlos Correa's first half this season, obviously it's a scenario where the Mets and Giants, both respectively dodged a bullet there. But nonetheless, I think the Giants are, missing that, star player, if you will. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do in the second half. They find themselves in the postseason mix. I'll definitely touch on that more, when I talk about the National League. Yeah, Gabe Kapler, no disrespect to him, but I think he represents a lot of the current MLB managers where they're basically taking their shots from the front office, and the general managers are like really calling the show. And I think the perfect example of that is with the New York Yankees with Brian Cashman and Aaron Boone. But that's a whole nother story for another day. But nonetheless, I do think there's a lot of excitement on tap for this second half of the season. To me, I can't wait for the All Star break to get over because I really want to see who's gonna. I want to see who's gonna come out, like gangbusters, if you will, for the second half of the season. Who's going to seize the moment? Who's going to, get off to that hot start? We saw the Rays do that on the American League side, and that they basically cruised, if you will, until this last week of the season where both, the Phillies and Braves went down there to the Trop and won, their respective series against Tampa Bay. But, Baltimore, I don't think enough people are talking about this team. And that's one thing that I think is going to work into their favor because they've been flying under the radar. And I think this year with the Orioles, they flew under the radar last year and didn't make the playoffs. I think Baltimore's not, they're going to keep flying under the radar this year. But I think this time Baltimore gets in. And I think before you blink, you're going to be like, well, how did Baltimore get here as far as advancing in the postseason? That's how good this team is. But nonetheless, I think it's going to be a battle. I don't want to sound like I'm rambling, but the second half on the AL side is definitely going to be a battle, especially in this East. 5 teams have a winning record in this division right now. That just lets you know how competitive that it is. Obviously, you think about the money that the Yankees spend. The Red Sox have scaled back a little bit in recent years, but you still got the Jays, the Rays who do it on coupons, and then the Orioles as well. So I think that is to me is one of the most intriguing things going in the second half of the season. How many teams from the East will get there? I think is going to be another big question. Do the Astros have enough in their tank to go back? Will Seattle turn it up? These are some questions that we got to wait to see whether or not they're going to be answered in the second half of the season. But I think we are in store for some exciting ball. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to follow me. If you can subscribe to this channel, but also please feel free to follow me on Twitter at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'd be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. You can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. And if I didn't get to it, I'm going to reiterate it now. Had a senior moment there. You know, if you like what you heard and saw, please feel free to like and subscribe to this channel. CJ, as always, it was a pleasure. I know that you're probably moonwalking into the All-Star break, if you will, with the way that the Braves have been playing. It's one of those where obviously we're not going to be talking about magic numbers or nothing like that, but if the Braves don't win this division, I think it'd be one of the biggest surprises of this MLB season. Because at this point on, in my opinion, I think they can go on cruise control. It's just going to be a matter of what they do in the postseason, and obviously, I would touch on that, more when I talk about the National League side. But nonetheless, I know you got to be feeling good about this. Saying yes, but it will be a little hard to wait until Friday for the next Braves game. Well, I don't know how much of a fan you are of the Derby, but that's going to be taking place tomorrow night, obviously. And then you got the Midsummer Classic, which is a shell of what it once was for a variety of reasons. And then we got a couple of down days on, but you know what? Friday will be here before you know it. But nonetheless, folks, my name is William Martin. I'm signing off, saying take care. Have a good night. And thanks once again for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. Be well, everybody.